most of you know Richard Swinburne, right? So Professor Kwan studied under him, and now he's the director of the Center for Sino-Christian Studies, right? So I know that you have got a lot of questions popping on your mind. You can type them down. If you have those questions, you can type them down in the chat box, or you can open up your microphone and ask. After I talk about the moral argument in the karmic context. So let me talk about this now. Right, so here is the rule which looks very common in any society. You go to any society anywhere in the world, you'll find whatever deed he does, that he will reap. That's from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. And the Bible, a man reaps what he sows. Jaise karni, vaise bharni, in Hindi, what you do is what you get. So this is regarded as a kind of an absolute law in karmic religions. Now, I will very quickly give you an overview of the various philosophical systems that are built on the very notion of karmic. Now, when I say karmic, what do I mean? I mean a belief in morality without the need for God, that sort of a framework which we find in Indian religions, especially most of the sects in Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism. So there is a discontinuity between the Christian view, or you can say the Western view of morality as an absolute, and the karmic view. In the Christianity, moral law is interpersonal, right? So it is something that is between people. Okay, so in the karmic view, karma, the law of karma, is impersonal. It is just a law of causality. It has nothing to do with personality or consciousness or anything. It's just a normal law. It's just an impersonal law out there. Christianity, God is a moral lawgiver. There is God who gives law, who gives commands. Okay, but in the karmic view, karma itself is amoral and mechanical. There is no God who particularly gives law. Even if there is a certain God in some sects that gives some sort of law, he is also under the law of karma. So for them, ultimately, karma is amoral. It has nothing to do with morality. It is not a moral law. It's just a law of causality. God is the moral judge in the Christian view. In the karmic view, karma needs no judge. Of course, some would say, well, Yama, the god of death, has a book of records and he judges and so on. But he's also part of the cosmic system. He's not over it. Okay, he's not the real. He also can get judged. All right. So the fourth one, God is the morally perfect one. There is none good but God. He is the embodiment of perfection, moral perfection, and the source of or morality. In Hinduism, especially, they talk about Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. I think you know about that. But it's not necessarily accepted that God is all good. I met a professor on train once. We had a discussion. I said, what is your explanation for evil in the world? And he said, well, if you find evil in the world and good in the world, it means it should also be in the source, right? So if there is something out, it should also be in the source. Nothing comes out of nothing. Something comes out of something. So God is all good, also all evil. Some of you may be studying Carl Jung, and he had a similar notion of Satan being one of the personality within the, of course, he didn't say Trinity, he said quaternity. So evil is part of God. That's the notion. Christianity, God is the ground of morality, while in the karmic, even gods are subject to karma. Everyone is subject to karma. Nobody can escape the hold of karma. So these are some discontinuities that we find between Christianity and so how do we argue about God and morality? If we talk about God as all good in a context like a karmic context, we need to keep all of these things in our mind. Now, very quickly, let me give you an overview of the Indian systems. We have the 6 Hindu systems: Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta, Mimamsika, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika. So Sankhya, Yoga are one. Just a little bit of difference. Sankhya is absolutely atheistic. It even has so many arguments that God does not exist. It went head on against Nyaya theists, arguing that God cannot exist. It's impossible for God to exist. There is no proof for God, and there is no need of God in this universe. Now you may be wondering, how can these be religious? Religious philosophies when they don't believe it, absolutely don't believe in God. But that is very true of karmic system, because they believe this is some sort of a law. It's not really moral, it's just a law, and this is sufficient to rule the world. So Sankhya is something like that. It is atheistic dualism. Yoga is also it tries to show itself as being theistic, but that God is your own self. Your own self is God. So this is a kind of self, a kind of dimension of your personality that is a God. So it's just you objectified in a way. So that's what I would call it as subjective theistic dualism, not at all similar to the Christian concept of God as the transcendent holy other, all right, who creates the world out of nothing. Vedanta, we all know about that, non-dualism. So only God exists and I am God, aham brahmasmi. Mimamsa, it is pluralistic, not dualistic or monistic. It's pluralistic, but at the same time, it is very, very, very strongly atheistic. They have these strong arguments that God cannot exist. Some of you might be wondering that atheism is built into the system, while people don't even know. They think that, well, in popular religion, you don't find it. But when you go to the philosophical basis, ground of it, is absolutely atheistic. And that's what we are trying to unravel. Nyaya and Vaisheshika, especially Nyaya, the epistemological genius that you find in Gautam Maharshi and all of these people who came up with all of these arguments, syllogisms, Indian syllogisms and all, they were very strong into logic. Nyaya itself means logic, okay? And they offered, later on, Udayana, they offered some arguments for the existence of God around maybe 7th century AD. They offered a number of arguments for the existence of God, mainly because the Sankhya were arguing against them, and the Buddhists and the Jains were trying to come up with many arguments to prove that God does not exist. So Nyaya, they felt it important to prove that God exists. And so they came up with cosmological arguments, argument from sustenance, and argument from also the belief in Veda, because the 6 schools of Indian philosophy are known as, in a way, as what you call that, astic, not Gnostic, astic, the believers, because they believed in Veda. So we'll look into their arguments shortly, and then I will try to show why even the Nyaya argument is not sufficient to give us a true concept of morality and God. Now, these are blatantly atheistic, all right? Buddhist, Jainis, and Charvaka, they absolutely have no place for God at all. So we don't talk about them. But of course, we even if I say Professor Kwan, he needs at least hours to cover all of these slides. And yeah, these arguments, we can't cover them all, but I think these will at least prod us to bring up some questions that we can discuss during the QA hour. Okay, so the Nyaya concept of God. God is the efficient cause of the universe, not the material cause. That's very different from the Vedanta. In Vedanta, God is the material cause. God, the universe is made up of God, all right? In Nyaya, no, the God is the efficient. He uses pre-existent material, like the Platonic God, he uses pre-existent material, mainly because in any sort of rational theologies, whatever, you go anywhere across the world, it's very difficult to come up with this notion of creating something out of nothing. Something cannot come out of nothing. So you don't find a creatio ex nihilo in any Indian system. Okay, so God is the efficient cause. He is not the material cause, but he uses pre-existing material. Secondly, God is perfect in majesty, glory, beauty, power. These are the 6 attributes of God in Nyaya concept. God is the director of human action and ensurer of fruit of actions. So there is a need for God to be there for any sort of conscious things to happen in the world, and even for something like a personal moral law to function. That is a strong argument of the Nyaya philosophers. And fourthly, God is the moral governor of all beings, and in a way, he helps karma function properly. So he's not above karma in a way, but he helps karma function. He metes out justice in a way that people can get it. So kind of an administrator or manager rather than a real judge. Number five, God is not bound by the law of karma. So that is a Nyaya concept. Okay, let's look at the arguments. Now I talk about Nyaya giving 9 arguments for the existence of God. And we'll look at the 7th argument and the 9th argument. The 7th argument from Vakyat. Vakyat means word. Now, all Hindu philosophical systems believed in the Veda. And if you believe in Veda, the Veda contain moral commands. Of course, the form in which the Vakyat argument is given, it doesn't mention moral, but that is how interpreters put it. Vedas contain moral commandments or any commandments which are considered to be word, eternal word. Now, these are intelligent words, all right? They are not nonsensical. They make sense. If they make sense, they are intelligent. And if they are intelligent, they can only be issued by an intelligent being. And they are moral commands, then they can only be issued by a morally excellent being. Therefore, God is the author of the moral commands. That's the Nyaya argument. Now, for those people like the Jains or anyone who doesn't believe in Vedas, the argument would still hold, because if you concede that there is some sort of moral objectivity there, if you concede some sort of moral objectivity there, then this argument holds for that, because moral objectivity is impossible without a morally excellent being as a source of it. And so God is the author of moral commands as such. Well, morally objective rules can be put in intelligent sentences, right? Statements, they become statements, moral statements. So that's how you trace the source of the commands or the statements. The 9th argument, adrishtat, which cannot be seen. Now, you will find this notion very, very, very common among people. Will say, well, why is this good man? He's such a good man, but he's suffering. He has not done anything. Or this baby is born like this. What did the baby do? You know, in the Bible, you find someone asking the question, this man is born blind. Was it because of his sins or his parents' sins or someone's sins? Yeah, sort of hinting to his past life, if you look at from the Hindu perspective. Did he do something wrong in his previous birth? Some of the Jews believed in reincarnation as well. Did you believe, he has done something in his past life, that's the reason why he's suffering like that? So that is something which Nyaya tries to use it. Now, it's arguing from the context. Please remember, it always argues in a framework which is accepted as a kind of a axiom for people in that context. So people usually say, well, he's suffering because of something that he may have done earlier, or this is a bad man, but he did not experience, he escapes, or he gets out anyway, maybe because he might have done something good in the past. Now, here is a catch. When you talk about karma, in the whole karmic notion, it's impossible to rationally talk about forgiveness. Good deeds will not cancel out bad deeds, all right? And bad deeds they are separate from each other. The causal relations are very separate. So adrishtat is something related to that. And Nyaya argued that adrishtat by itself, when you talk about this adrishtat or fortune or unseen fortune, it is by itself unintelligent. Now, if it is unintelligent, then it's impossible for the mechanism to mete out something which is related to moral intelligence. And so the conclusion that they gave is, since now this is in the bracket, it's my input into that. I'm reading into the text. Since moral action is intentional, produced by desire and volition, okay, and the Nyaya also argued that this desire and volition is put into humans by God, all right, because they can't just do it by themselves. something in the previous birth. Now you're having this desire, it should be put by God. And so it needs the guidance of a supremely intelligent God. Well, if those who reject the Vedas and those who reject any of those things would even say, well, if they believe in some sort of moral consequences, if you do something wrong, then you reap it. If they even believe in something like this, whatever deed he does, that he will reap, or man reaps what he sows, in the moral context, not just physical context, but moral context, then the entailment would be that entails divine existence. Entails divine existence. Even here, it entails a moral governor who kind of orchestrates all of these things to happen in a way. Well, I'm seeing if we are going overboard the time, but yeah. So these are some of the problems that you'll find, and Nyaya, the Nyaya God, of course, is not at all similar to the biblical God. We have talked about that. There are certain problems that we see, and some of these problems are: question, can moral action be mechanically regulated? Now, this is not just a new question. Yes, people are talking that when they are talking about artificial intelligence. Can moral action be mechanically regulated? Can we do away with these codes of justice and all? Is there anything absolutely good or evil? So, but the big question that people usually ask is, from where did this karma, law of karma, even come into being? So there are a lot of issues with this, and the main problem is the mechanical or impersonal world that is envisioned here. It contradicts consciousness, intelligence, personality, rationality, and evolution. Therefore, you cannot talk about a moral world at all. And so the more rational conclusion would be the Jain logical conclusion, where you just become passive. Because you can't do anything, you just become passive. Don't do anything. And so that passive embracement of suffering would be the final resort for salvation from the whole chain of karma and samsara in any karmic context. So, the philosophers kept arguing about that, but I wanted to just give you a quick note so that you can do your further research. I've never seen any article talk about Nyaya moral arguments. So if anyone of you are interested, you can work on that. So, okay, so did I share my screen, by the way? Were you able to see my screen? Okay, thank you. All right, so we should have Q&A, but I think we took, yeah, we have a question here. After taking a few questions, we'll take a break, okay? And then we'll have Dr. Andrew Loke present to us. We'll take a few questions and then we'll take a break. Karthik has a question. Couple of questions regarding theodicy. By what criteria something is judged to be evil?